Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Bowen. Welcome to LTUE. I hope you're having a great conference so far. Welcome to my presentation. Today, we're going to be talking about creativity. And in particular, I'm going to be trying to get across two things. First, I'm going to try and dispel a myth in popular culture that I think is putting people into creative buckets. And second, I'm going to introduce a process that I went through that I think we can all go through to be more creative versions of ourselves. A little background about myself. As I mentioned, my name is Jonathan Bowen. I have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Brigham Young University, and I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology, specializing in systems and robotics. I've worked for a number of high-profile creative companies, including Walt Disney Imagineering, where I worked on the Star Wars Rise of the Resistance ride. I've also spent quite a bit of time working on the Hong Kong Disneyland projects, including Frozen Expansion and Ant-Man and the Wasp Nano Battle. After my time at Walt Disney Imagineering, I transitioned to a product development, product design role at Fluke, and then moved on to Cricut. My skills and background include engineering and product design, but also graphic design and publishing, videography, photography, and computer graphics. If you look at the lower right-hand corner there, you'll see an animation. I helped produce all of the introductory video content for the RPG Arium, and I also do creative and technical writing on the side. To get us on the same page, I'd like to go ahead and agree on a definition of creativity. Merriam-Webster defines creativity as the ability to create. And while I do think this is a valid definition, I'd like to find one that doesn't actually use the word create. And so I'm going to look to definition 2 from dictionary.com that defines creativity as the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations, etc. And the key thing that I'd like to get across here from this definition is that creativity is about adding to the world's pool of ideas and creations, irrespective of the profession in which the creation takes place. You'll notice nowhere in this definition does it use the word painter or writer. And so I'd like each of you to kind of answer this question that I just put up. It's going to be personal to each and every one of you. Are you right-brained or are you left-brained? And I think almost all of you immediately had an answer in your head to this question, and I want you to think a moment about why that is. We're going to go ahead and talk about an article. It's here kind of small on the right-hand side just to give you an idea of how big it is. The article is medically reviewed. It's titled Left Brain versus Right Brain Dominance. About 3 paragraphs in, there's a very nice infographic. We'll go ahead and make that big, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then in the 3rd paragraph and lower at the very bottom, the article goes into address the actual validity of the theory itself. The article says, given the popularity of the idea of right-brained and left-brained thinkers, it might surprise you to learn that this idea is just one of many myths about the brain. Researchers have demonstrated that right-brain, left-brain theory is a myth, yet its popularity persists. Why? Unfortunately, many people are likely unaware that the theory is outdated. In fact, the idea seems to have taken on a mind of its own within popular culture. And so each one of you who had almost an immediate answer to whether you are right-brained or left-brained, the reality is that it had nothing to do with whether this theory is correct or not, but everything to do with the fact that this theory is so ingrained in popular culture that we've all almost sort of accepted and realized that we are one of these halves, even though it's not necessarily true. And so I'd like to do some analysis of the infographic to look at what this theory tells us. And if we look at the left-hand side of the brain, it's kind of this sad blue guy who's interested in logic and is interested in numbers. And, you know, I know a lot of people that aren't really interested in numbers. Numbers of themselves are not particularly interesting. And then we look on the right side and we've got this happy, serene guy, and he's labeled creativity, and he's painting, and there's fluffy bunnies, and there's like hearts and light bulbs and happy faces. And I want you all to look at this picture objectively for a minute, and I want you to think, which one of these two halves of the brain do you want to be? And if any of you answered that you don't want to be the happy right brain, well, that would really surprise me, actually. I think almost everybody would look at this picture and decide that they want to be the happy right brain and not this sad left brain. And it's not just that one piece of artwork that does this. It turns out that if you look at any of the artwork, almost all of it has the same kind of idea that the left brain is this gray or kind of blue sort of color, and they use descriptive words like mathematics and logic and science. And the right brain is this super happy, fun side that's like colorful, and it says arts and creative, passion, freedom. right? And I don't know really anybody who would look at the left side versus the right side and say, I want to be that dull and gray left side. No, I think everybody wants to be the super happy, free right side. And just to kind of show you how deep that this idea goes in popular culture, I'd like you to look at each one of these people, and I'd like you to define them as being creative or logical, and think through how right brain, left brain activity would tend to define them. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to go through that. All right, so I'm not going to kind of reveal the answers that traditional left brain, right brain theory would tell us, and that is that the artist, the dancer, the musician, and the sculptor would traditionally be defined as right brain individuals doing right brain activities, whereas the computer programmer, the biologist, and the mathematician would be traditionally defined doing left brain activities. And something I want you to think about is there any reason that skills in these activities are exclusive to certain types of people? Is there any reason that the dancer can't also be a mathematician, that the sculptor can't also be a biologist? Is there any sort of limitation here that would separate these people? Because this is really what left brain and right brain theory suggests, is that these people are distinct, that they are either or, that they can't do both. And to sort of refute this question, I'd like to go ahead and look at a few individuals who have, throughout their lives, really defied this expectation. The first I'd like to talk about is Leonardo da Vinci, and he is well known as being an artist for the Mona Lisa and many other famous artworks. But beyond that, he also brought a lot of his skills and talents into areas that would be traditionally thought of as being very much left brain. His technical drawings for the time were almost unprecedented. He had a number of ideas, some even completely infeasible, that were truly remarkable technologically speaking. The second individual I'd like to talk about is Walt Disney. Walt is traditionally known more for that role he shows in the lower left as the animator. He invented Mickey Mouse. He drew Mickey Mouse for the first time. He spent a lot of time working on animated feature films. But what is maybe less known about him is his degree of success in technical fields. Down in the lower middle and the lower right, what Walt is showing off is an invention known as the multiplane camera. And one of the issues with making animated feature film is that before inventions like this camera, you basically would have to draw the background, and then you draw the characters on top of the background. And every single time that you change a new frame, you have to redraw the background and the characters over and over and over and over again. And it was a really inefficient way to do film, because the reality is that the background usually changed very little, while the characters would change a lot in their motion. And so what Walt proposed and what was built was this camera that essentially would stack layers of artwork on top of each other, and the artwork could move relative to each other, it could be placed relative to each other, and in this way you could spend your time and effort on a singular beautiful background, and you could move that left and right on the camera, and then you would place characters that would move very dynamically with respect to the background, and all you had to draw was the characters. You didn't have to draw the same background over and over and over again behind the characters. And so what this did is it made animated feature films a lot more economical. Another thing that Walt is known for is his work to produce Disneyland. The idea of Disneyland, which was pretty much unprecedented at the time, was that you would take what was really industrial manufacturing equipment. These were systems, these were robots that were used to make cars, to make heavy industrial equipment. And instead of using it to make cars and industrial equipment, Walt decided to put people on them. And then he realized you could take more of this equipment and you could put them into characters. You could give them faces. You could entertain people in a way that they had never been entertained before. And so beyond just his role as this artist, as this animator, his role in being creative kind of stemmed a whole large field of various technical and artistic skills. Another individual I'd like to talk about is myself, because in a lot of ways I also tended to defy this traditional left-right brain idea. And the thing that I'd like to get across a little bit is that all my life I've actually been probably more skilled in those skills that would be traditionally thought of as being left brain. For so long, I rejected math and science because, the left brain shows math and science, but I wanted to be, in reality, this guy on the right, this happy guy who is creative, who is painting, who's making things. That's who I wanted to be. And for so long, I thought I had to be that guy to be creative. I thought I had to be the painter, the drawer. I did not think that I could be creative and love math and science. And to give you an idea of how strongly I took this, I finished all the math that my high school had to offer before my junior year. And I did that so that in my last 2 years of high school, I could pretty much exclusively focus on what I thought of as being creative art classes. And that in of itself, looking back on it, is really quite silly, because where my skills and talents really were in math and science and numbers. And what I would find is that I would regularly struggle in comparison to my peers when we get into things like detailed sketching and illustration. It's just not where my talents lie. And yet I wanted to be creative. I wanted to make new things, and I thought this is what I had to do to be there. And to kind of show you this, the reflection of this, on the left is where I thought I had to be. I was painting, I was drawing, I was trying to do the best I could to sketch. And to be honest with you, it's a horrible piece of artwork. There's something nice conceptually about it, that it could be something more, but it is a really amateur piece of artwork. And what I realized was that when I took this concept, this amateur piece of artwork, and I took it into areas where I had immediately more skills and abilities, I immediately found a substantive improvement in my ability to be creative successfully. Rather than hand drawing the woman, I took a beautiful photo. And rather than hand drawing the environment around here, I'm using graphic design concepts, shapes, to sort of create this imagined world that she's living in. And this is where I realized that being creative wasn't about only being able to draw or paint, but it's about taking any tools, any skills at your disposal, and it's about using them to create something new that's meaningful to you or to others. And throughout my career, I've basically taken and expanded upon this concept. I worked on, if you've ridden Star Wars Rise of the Resistance, I spent quite a bit of time in concept design on the very large guns that move out and shoot the opposing ship. I spent quite a bit of time on Ant-Man and the Wasp. We basically took a ride that was previously Buzz Lightyear, and we rethemed it in a number of ways to be this beautiful Ant-Man themed attraction. I've taken photography and taken it a step beyond by taking projectors and projecting it onto individuals. I've done CGI and computer graphics. I've done photography. And even to an extent, I have figured out how to be creative with my talent of mathematics. How do I create new ways of observing the world that have not previously been done? And so what I'd like to do is, beyond just these 3 case studies, I'd like to show a video where a cognitive psychologist is talking about what he thinks it means to be left brain or right brain, and if that theory is valid.
What is creativity? It is such a difficult question.
We're finding that it's not just a simple left brain, right brain distinction.
Working collaboratively is absolutely a summation of perspectives, and as more and more things get made that way, it will always be beneficial.
I think creativity, for the most part, is a very messy affair. This notion that it's coming from nowhere, I think, is false.
The latest neuroscience of creativity is really exciting to me, because we're finding that it's not just a simple left brain, right brain distinction. People who are more open to combining lots of different associations that are coming from various different brain networks do tend to be more creative. There's lots of stages of the creative process you have to take into account, and different stages of that process activate different neural networks. A neural network is just simply different areas of the brain communicating with each other. So during the stage which I'm trying to learn lots of things, called the preparation stage, you see a lot of brain activation in areas associated with attention and deliberate focus, called executive functioning. Then there is this important stage where you let it go. It's called the incubation stage. It's really important. There is research showing that mind wandering away from the current task and then returning to the task, those people have more creative ideas when they come back. And then there's another stage of illumination or insight, where these connections automatically, subconsciously collide and then reach the threshold of consciousness. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's the idea. And then once that happens, you're not done. You're not creative yet. So that's why it's really important for this last stage of the creative process, verification, where you use these executive processes or this critical thinking skills. You think about your audience and you really craft the message so it's best received by people, because some of the greatest creative ideas of all time can easily be lost because they're not packaged in the right way or not consumable. I think what cognitive scientists are on the forefront of trying to discover right now is isolating all these separate processes. And what interests me is how we bring all this together to come up with a more nuanced model of creativity. So a complete understanding of creativity is going to require bringing all this perspective together. Anyone can be creative in the domain that is best for them to express themselves. It's important to think about creativity a little bit differently than just this catch-all thing.
For me, creativity is making something that didn't exist before, and so that could be a work of art, it could be making dinner. Creativity is something that you can find just about everywhere.
By any definition of hasn't been done before, having additional perspectives and skills to draw from, I think will always be beneficial. I can't see it hindering anything.
I think most people who do creative work are combining things and transforming them. But at the end of the day, if you keep pushing, you can eventually get someplace that is beyond what you thought was possible.
So the individuals in this video basically question whether the left brain, right brain theory really means anything. And Keeley, they do not link creativity to any particular skill set, like being able to draw or being able to write or being able to do math. Frankly, creativity is that original definition that we talked about. It's about putting new ideas together to create something new. And so what we need to do is we need to throw this theory out, and not just like throw it out and claim that we're throwing it out. I mean, really throw it out. Never talk about it again. Do not put people into buckets. And that's really one of the main issues with this theory, is that this theory, in a nutshell, puts scientists into this bucket that they cannot be creative, and it puts artists into this bucket that they cannot be logical. And in this way, it causes us to treat people with a bias that really would not be appropriate to treat them with. And so what I'd like you to do is, I have these same individuals as we showed earlier that we classified according to the left brain, right brain theory. I'd like you to think about each of them for just a moment and consider how each of them has an opportunity within their own area to be creative. What would they do in their skill to be creative, to do something new? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to think about that. So I'm just going to reveal kind of one at a time potential things that they could be doing that's creative. So the woman who is painting on the upper left, perhaps she has a number of art styles that she has become accustomed to, that she's become skilled in, and she is now combining them in a new way that is personal to her and to her family. Perhaps the woman in the middle who is dancing is writing choreography. She is inventing new ways to move her body that are not associated with any kind of traditional dance style. Perhaps the gentleman next to the mixer is mixing classical and synth music, doing something that he feels there isn't enough of in the world. Perhaps the woman on the right on the computer programming is coming up with an entirely new way for Webflow. Web programming is one of those things that has been traditionally difficult for those that are skilled. It takes quite a bit of time, and maybe she is coming up with a brand new way to do it. On the lower left, perhaps the gentleman is inventing improved antibiotics, finding new ways to keep us all healthy to be able to live improved lives. Perhaps the gentleman in the middle there is describing unknown geometry. Math is beautiful in that it allows us to, through symbolism, represent the universe around us. And even though we have a large body of knowledge of mathematics, the reality is the universe is infinite. And our body of mathematics still only describes a relatively small slice. And so being able to create new ways of describing the world around us through mathematics, there's plenty of opportunity to do that. And the woman on the lower right, perhaps she is creating a historically resemblant yet modernly infused custom vase. So given that we have now shown that left-right brain theory, it means nothing about what you can be, what you can do to be creative, I'd like to show you a process that you can go through, that I went through, to help be the most creative person of myself so that you can be the most creative version of yourself. Step one in this process is that you need to assess your own talents and passions. There are things that you look around at your peers, and I'm sure there are things that you are naturally better at doing. These talents, these are things that you are just better at. And similar, you look around and there are things that just interest you more. There are things that you want to talk about more than your peers do. These two things, these are your talents and your passions. These are things that you are both good at and that you are excited about. And hopefully there should be some overlap between them. Even if there does not appear to be some initially, through a deep look, you should be able to find some kind of overlap between these two in some way. And it is at the intersection of these talents and passions where you will be the most enabled to be quickly the most creative. One thing I want you to keep in mind as you go through this process is that needing to make money from your talents and passions, it can change your outlook. It can change how you see it. For me personally, being able to make money from my talents and passions, it's motivating. It keeps me interested. Whereas for others, this requirement sort of drives them away. It disinterests them from things that they love. And so it's important that you keep this in mind as you go through this process. Kind of talking about my experience going through this process, there were sort of three key passions that I've had almost my entire life. The first is that I love creating things that people love. When I see someone using something with a thing that I've helped create and that they enjoy it, that they love it, that really warms my heart. Second, I love things that are aesthetic, and this is kind of a really big, wide field of area. It includes art, it includes design, it includes so much. Anything that is generally beautiful, those are things that I am passionate about. Finally, science and technology. This idea that we can observe the world around us and use that knowledge to make better predictions about our experiences in the future, to use that knowledge to be able to build better products, to be able to build a better society, that is really intriguing to me. It's something I'm very passionate about and something that I really enjoy pursuing in my life. And then from each of these three key passions, there's a number of skills that I've developed over the years: mechanical design, product development, graphic design, programming, and experimenting. Each of these things are things that I would say now are talents that I've developed. But at one point, it definitely wasn't that way. These things were things that I was interested in, but really did not have developed well enough to use in day-to-day life to be creative. The second step in this process is probably one of the most challenging steps because it requires a little bit of humility and honesty on your part to yourself. You need to start out by listing your weaknesses. The reality is that there are things that we are all not as good at as our peers. You also want to go ahead and list your dislikes, things that you do that make you feel unpleasant and unhappy when you do them. And more than likely there's going to be some overlap of these things with your talents and passions. Very seldom do you find a talent and passion that has nothing that you dislike. You need to be very consciously aware that what you are choosing will have things that you won't like, and you need to kind of accept that early on. And likewise, the ability and requirement to make money can influence how you feel about these things that you don't like. Sometimes this ability to monetize on something that you dislike makes you dislike it quite a bit less. And it's the same otherwise. Sometimes needing to make money can make you dislike something even more. I won't spend a lot of time going through my weaknesses and dislikes, but just to kind of look at the highlights. To a certain, I hate repetitive and fixed tasks. Whenever I have to just do something that's a prescribed task over and over and over again, it just drives me nuts. My ADHD just kind of comes out, and I just can't stand it. The second thing is I can be sometimes quite socially awkward. I need to be in a supportive team that I know that I can be comfortable around, or otherwise I just am not a very creative version of myself, and I'm not very good at becoming comfortable in those uncomfortable situations. Third is sketching and illustrating. If you were looking before, you would have actually seen that the very things that I'm kind of interested in, things that are aesthetic, well, sketching and illustrating falls right in with that. And the truth is that I love a beautiful sketch or a beautiful illustration. And when I'm doing development, I have the ability to be able to do basic sketching and illustration, but the job itself, having to go through and do that kind of detailed work, it's not something that I enjoy. It doesn't intrigue me. It doesn't interest me. I love the beautiful work that artists produce through their illustrations, but myself, whenever I go to try and practice it myself, I just find that I don't enjoy it. The next step is to focus your energy. Based off of how you assessed your talents and passions and the weaknesses and dislikes that you admitted, you need to go ahead and choose where the most overlap occurs so that you can pick skills that maximize your talents and passions and minimize your weaknesses and dislikes. This is where you're going to have the most opportunity for success and creativity. Once you've decided on those skills that you want to improve yourself in, you need to research and decide how to develop those skills. Thankfully, we live in a day where the educational resources available to us are immense. We have universities, we have online tutorials, you can hire tutors, books. There are so many resources that we have to learn from, and we are truly blessed to be living in a day with all those resources. And once you've done your research on which resources you think are going to be the most helpful, you need to go ahead and decide on a plan for using those resources and then prepare. Often universities can require months in advance of preparation to be admitted, or you might need to find and hire the right tutor, or even just research and decide on the right book. Once you have decided how you're going to go about learning and made that plan, you need to make sure you follow through and that you learn what you had planned to learn. It's okay if this plan changes. It's expected that as you learn, you're going to continue to change your opinion of the skill that you're learning about, but don't ever give up. And especially don't ever give up on this whole process. Make sure that you are continually assessing this process and progressing forward to be more creative. As you learn and practice the skill, it's important that you create goals. And a reason why is because it can be difficult to know, just based off your knowledge alone, whether you've arrived to be creative. The reality is that almost every skill is incredibly deep. You can spend years or lifetimes becoming very, very skilled. But if you never actually use that skill creatively because you don't feel like you've arrived, well, then it hasn't done you a whole lot of good. And so by creating goals to help set milestones for when you feel like you have enough knowledge to meet some of your creative goals, at that point you will have the self-confidence to do so. And kind of along that line, you should start being creative, start doing as soon as possible, even as you're learning. The truth is that in most skills, you can achieve some level of basic proficiency in just a few weeks or months. And the more you use the skills as you're developing in real creative projects, the better you're going to know them, the better you're going to be at learning them. The last step of this is to just be creative, to start doing, to use your passion and skills in order to create new ideas and new things. While you're doing this, you need to be aware of and use what drives you. Whether you create for others, yourself, or both, use it to fuel your creativity, to keep you interested in what you're doing. And I want you to know that no matter what it is, you are worthwhile, and no matter how small your creation is, it's valuable. This is really important because there's a lot of people who feel that you need to make something or create something truly world-changing, and the reality is that's just not true. In the scope of the world's ideas and thoughts and progress, everybody has what is actually a small part. And that part in of itself is infinitely valuable, because without it, well, the world wouldn't be what it is today. And along that same line, once you have created your contribution, don't be timid about it. There will be people who will hate and reject you and your contribution, and you need to just ignore them. The world needs more bold and creative people in every aspect of life. We need those people to not be afraid to share their creations with the world. And as part of not being afraid, you also need to not be a perfectionist with your creation. The world is full of all kinds of imperfect and not even finished creations, and all of them to some degree have benefited or inspired someone else. Don't require that your creation be perfect or finished to share it with the world. Just share it. I'd like to show one more video about how we need to kind of broaden our definition of creativity in order to really appreciate what we're talking about here.
When you hear the word creative, you might think of a painter, or a playwright, or an author, or a photographer, or a filmmaker, or a chef. In other words, you might think of people who make things. I think it's what we mean when we use a label like creative type. But there's no such thing as creative type. We are all creative, every one of us. We just need a bigger definition of creativity. Yes, creativity involves making things, but it can also mean mashing up ideas in innovative ways. It can mean thinking differently about data and finding unique solutions to practical problems. It can mean hacking systems and tweaking things in unusual ways. It can mean exploring ideas and navigating information until you become an expert curator. It can mean designing systems that empower the creative work of others. It can mean creating change in the world by speaking truth and leading movements and interacting with people. See, each of these creative approaches shape our world in profound ways. And the more we see the creativity all around us, the more we are able to appreciate the creativity inside ourselves.
And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to leave you with a 5-point summary of this conversation. These are the 5 things that, if you take away anything from this presentation, these are the most important. The first is that left and right brain theory does not describe someone's ability to be creative or limit their ability to be logical. We cannot keep putting people in these buckets. Second, all skills, whether it's painting, writing, math, or science, they provide an opportunity for creative expression, for a person to take previous ideas and combine them together to create something new. Third, all of us can assess our skills, passions, dislikes, and weaknesses to determine where best to devote our time, and we can learn any skill with enough planning and practice. Finally, be creative, be bold. Everything that you create, no matter how small, is valuable. It is worthwhile.